Yeah.
Like, we don't like to talk about money in this country.
It's almost treated as a taboo subject.
85 and 80 and 93% of employees turn up to work every day with a financial worry on their mind. That's huge. I want to say it's like 67% of people, if their wage didn't hit their bank at the end of the month, that would be it. They wouldn't be able to pay any bills. Well, these guys can't handle their money. They've taken 30 Klarnas out in 2 months.
First question any Brit asks when they meet someone new is, what do you do?
And I think that's one of the worst questions you ever get asked. What do you do for a living? It's probably the biggest anxiety-bringing questions most people can be asked.
You need to justify it and be like, oh, I do this really cool job. When actually, most of us don't.
It was kind of doing what we all do, just spending money for the sake of it, buying rubbish, which I didn't really need. It was so easy to go, oh yeah, let's go out on a Friday night and have a few drinks and some food, and before you know it, you spend 100 quid.
Welcome back to the Not Quite Pod. Today we've got Gareth with us. Gareth, do you just quickly want to introduce yourself and let everyone know a bit about yourself?
Yes, my name's Gareth Shears. I'm a chartered financial planner, business owner, father, husband, based here in kind of South Wales. But I've been in the financial services industry for probably the best part of 2 decades now. And I kind of work with clients and business owners, but I've been a business owner for a little bit longer than that. And I'm really passionate about educating people about money and finances. Like we deal with clients on a day-to-day basis, helping them with their financial planning in their future. But I think there's a huge gap out there in the world where we just don't get taught these things at school about financial education, money, and kind of, making a plan for the future. We get taught about trigonometry and all these type of things, but we never get taught about actually what is national insurance and how do we get a mortgage, what's good debt, bad debt. So I'm really passionate about stuff like that. So that's the kind of story that I kind of share across my social media profiles, and one that I kind of like to go into schools and talk about as well.
I love this because it's perfectly to what I always say, particularly with my generation. Half of them don't understand finances to the level of they probably need to. And I always say, and I've been open with on this podcast before, the only reason I have the financial knowledge that I have is because my mum's a mortgage and financial advisor. So I grew up hearing it, listening to it, and kind of learned by osmosis. But you speak to friends my age and the friends around me, and they don't. It's not something. You're right. It's not something we're taught. And
no, it's not. And it's a bit of a faux pas talking about money as well. I think. Yeah. Like we don't like to talk about money in this country, especially. I don't know what it's like in America and places like that, where things are a little bit more open. But I think as family, as couples, as partners, whatever it kind of might be, we just don't really talk about money, do we? Because it's a bit of a no-go kind of area. And that's it. Unless you've kind of grown up in a household where, maybe like you say, your mum's financial advisor, mortgage broker, you've been around that kind of money in that environment, and that's kind of shaped you. But most people haven't kind of got that. And if they're not getting it from school, they're not getting it from home. Where are they going to get it from?
Yep. Because as well, I've seen it with friends, parents and stuff. They feel guilty because they don't have the information, but it wasn't even taught and in their journey, and it's such a, as you say, it's almost treated as a taboo subject. But I wonder, in the UK, I was talking to a friend the other day, and it's often the conversation of money. It almost becomes this like status thing of like everyone's positioning themselves, sort of like, I earn X amount of money, I do this with my money, and I think that doesn't help with our relationship with the money and how we talk about it, because it almost comes across as like, oh, I'm showing off, and I think that's the challenge as well.
Yeah, I think that's it. We're pretty bad for that in the UK. I think if like kind of rewarding people who are doing well, and if you do talk about money, like people think you're boasting. Do you know what I mean?
And I think as well, there's so much pressure around. I was having a conversation with a friend the other day, and the conversation was the first question any Brit asks when they meet someone new is, "What do you do?" Yeah. Which then has a direct correlation to how well are you doing financially? Because everyone has a rough, unless you've got something really niche that you do, everyone's got like a rough gauge of what that's going to look like. And it is so interesting because I think that has a big impact on how we talk about money and how we learn about money. Because again, I think there's a level of shame attached to it as well.
Well, I think that's one of the worst questions you ever get asked, isn't it? Whenever you go somewhere or you go to an event or networking, what do you do for a living? And like, it's one of the worst questions, probably the biggest anxiety bringing questions most people can be asked. Because some people are kind of either embarrassed about what they do or don't really know how to explain what they're doing.
Completely. And then it's that whole thing, especially if you do something quite niche and you try to explain what you do. And then also it's that, again, you almost feel like you need to justify it and be like, oh, I do this really cool job. When actually, most of us don't. We just do a job and that's
exactly.
what we do.
Most of us just to do a job and it is what it is. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of, I get that 100%.
What about, where did your love of finances and money come from in terms of learning about it and learning the processes involved with it?
Do you know, that's an interesting one. I think a lot of it stems from, I've always liked business. Okay.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to kind of be a business owner. Just kind of, I went to university and did a sport degree. Which I've done absolutely nothing with. Then I kind of worked in pubs and restaurants, and then I kind of lost my way a little bit when I was in my early 20s. So I joined the police because I didn't know what else to do. So I spent 6 years in the police, and I felt that I was missing something in my life. And so I retrained in financial services, but I always wanted to kind of be a business owner because I always felt that it was a great career because you could actually impact people individually. Do you know what I mean? It was because one thing I found in the police was I couldn't really impact anyone. The courts never backed you up. You never really made a difference in society. You were never going to make a difference in what was going on in the legal system because it's just not geared that way. So it's quite disheartening. So I thought, well, what can I go and do actually where I can make a difference? And that was kind of helping people with their finances. And that's where it kind of came from. And that's just grown. And I've been doing this nearly 2 decades now, and I love coming to work every day. I love the way we're evolving the business and the message we're kind of giving out the clients we work with. Even it's tough times at the moment. Donald Trump is battering the markets at the moment, so it's tough old times for clients. But do you know what I mean? It's just part of the job, and I kind of love speaking to clients and dealing with them and helping them move forward with their plans for retirement and the future and so on and so forth.
I think that you hit the nail on the head of a lot of us when it comes to careers of you often feel like you can't help people. So being in a position where you feel like you're directly impacting someone and supporting someone, it's like any grain of knowledge I get to give to someone, whether it be of the limited financial knowledge that I have, or whether coming back to sort of more what I talk about of disability, anytime I'm able to give that like nugget of information, that's where the sort of the kick comes from. I think you're completely right of there's so much related to what we do and finding a way of like helping people. But interestingly, I wanted to ask you, is there any advice that you wish you had? Obviously, you now support people with their financial planning. Is there any advice that you'd give or wish you had when you started out with financial planning?
Yeah, do you know what? Before I started doing this, I think one thing I think I was really bad for when I was younger was kind of doing what we all do, just spending money for the sake of it, buying rubbish, which I didn't really need. Do you know what I mean? And never really kind of having a kind of an eye on the future. And I think I wish if I do, like what I kind of tell clients now is, especially ones who've got kind of young kids and stuff, let's get investing from the start. Yeah, okay. If money can go up and down and you do have that chance, you could kind of lose money. Yeah. Okay. If you invest properly, you're never going to really lose all your money. Okay. It's just going to go up and down with the markets. Yep. But I think if I'd started off doing what I kind of say to people, just put like £50, £100 away a month when you start working and into, some sort of stocks and shares fund and kind of let it grow. By the time you get to your 40s, 50s, you have a nice little pot there. And if you keep topping that up, and I think that was it. I think what I teach people now, if I'd learned that when I was that age, I think it'd make a huge difference because, it was so easy to go, oh yeah, let's go out on a Friday night and have a few drinks and some food. And before you know it, you spend £100. Well, you do that every single Friday, Saturday night. You could have probably just had one weekend off and saved a couple £100 every single month. You know what I mean? But don't get me wrong, I'd never give back the time I had and the fun I had and the things I've learned over my life. But there are little bits I wish I kind of kept one eye on the future. And that's one thing I kind of talk a lot about when I talk about people about educating them is just keep one eye on the future. Even if you can only put away £5 or £10 a month, just try and do that.
Yeah. Every little help, which is that whole thing of, as someone that knows a bit as well about the stock market, it's all about compounding interest, and that works no matter which way you look at it. It doesn't matter whether it's
the eighth wonder of the world, supposedly.
Yeah, and I think as well, like interestingly, I was going to talk to you about stocks and how that all works because I think a lot of people they still see it as that like individual stock trading, and that's what scares them, because it's that
100%.
whole thing of, oh, but
And
I
that's
need
the misconception.
100 grand in to make any money in it. That's not how that works.
No. And I think that's one of the big misconceptions. And I think that's where a lot of people have got these horror stories about investing, because they've usually, like, we still get it now. We have someone coming in, oh yeah, my uncle invested some money back in years ago in the bank, and you're like, what did he invest in? Or just in bank shares? And I was like, right, okay, so he had one share. So if he had 50 grand in that, and when the financial crisis happened in 2008, the stock market crashed, and so did if you had money in the banks then, it just absolutely plummeted. It never really recovered properly. So that was just one share. But when we're talking about investing properly in a fund, you've probably got, you could have tens of thousands of underlying Amazon, Apple, bank shares, British Gas, BP, emerging markets. You're well diversified. So that's totally different. I think that educational point is actually, we're not talking about trading in shares. We don't do that. We don't do that as a company. We don't even have a license to trade like that. We're all about putting portfolios together, which are all geared up towards a long-term plan. Do you know what I mean? Yeah,
completely. And I think as well is that I say it's that whole thing of thinking of it massively long term. Long term is sort of the best way. Well, in my opinion, that's the best way to look at it. Because if you get too fixated, as someone I am that guy that wants everything yesterday. When you're constantly checking it, that's probably the worst behavior you can get into. It's kind of that whole thing of just take it slow. And also, I think as well, it's completely remembering it's completely in your control of how much you want to put in, how much you're comfortable putting in, and it's all about how comfortable you are with that risk as well.
I think that's it.
Go on. Sorry.
I think it's being comfortable with risk and understanding it as well. That's a big piece, because I don't think we really understand risk properly in the UK. We've got this misconception that actually the bank is the least riskiest place to leave your money. Well, historically, most people don't go searching for the best interest rate. Okay, so you end up being stuck in your bank, maybe 0.5% interest rate when inflation sat at 3%, for argument's sake. Well, technically, your money's going back every year, going backwards. Yeah. So that's more risk than anything. And I think people kind of forget that. Well, actually, the buying power of your money is depleting because it's sat in the bank not making interest.
Yeah, completely right. And I think it's that whole thing of, I say, learning how it all works. I say, when you learn about inflation and how that works versus how much you're getting in the bank, then you can make an informed decision. Because obviously, the often advice that you will be given is, for the short term, banks are great. But if you need access to it quickly, great. Long term wise, then you want to be looking more towards investing long term in the stock market or something along that line. And I think it's just understanding how all the pieces of the puzzle work, because they all have their perfect positions of, like, there is an argument for keeping money in a bank, but it's just how everything works together.
Oh yeah, I think that's it. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of, a lot of it for me is the education side. It's kind of understanding about kind of money and actually how you can use it to your best advantage. I mean, and actually understanding the difference between leaving it in the bank or investing it in your pension and what stocks and shares. That education piece is just missing.
Massively. And I think, as we've said, it's that as well that will relieve so much of the financial anxiety. And before we talk about the anxiety that comes with finances, I wanted to come on to a point you mentioned earlier about, like, the mistake that you wish you didn't make when you were younger was kind of spending too much money when you were younger and sort of not putting it to one side when you could. I wanted to ask, because one of the things I talk about a lot of the time when we talk about money is, like, people's relationship with money and the psychological impact of it. And I always find it interesting to get people like yourself to speak on the fact of, like, the argument of saving and then the argument of enjoying the money you earn and balancing those two, because it's quite a skill to balance the two, because I've seen it before with friends, you kind of end up in two very extreme camps. You got the ones that, like, oh, you only live once, you got to do everything, or the others are like, oh, but I might lose my job tomorrow, what am I going to do then?
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and you're very right. I think it's very rare for people to sit in the middle of those two camps. I think you're either, this live for today, or you're a really good saver, and the really good savers have anxiety about kind of not kind of potentially running out of money, but actually the ones who are really frivolous don't care. Do you know what I mean? And not bothered about what the future holds. And it's quite interesting to see that. If you can get that blend of the two, you're in that perfect kind of situation. But I think, like, for me, I'm all about kind of having fun and living for today, because we don't know what's around the corner. Okay. Life, like we always say to clients, life is not a rehearsal. Okay. This isn't a rehearsal for what life's going to be. This is what it is. So we don't know what's around the corner. So, it's that kind of balance of having fun, but just keeping that one eye on the future. And I think if you can kind of and that's the kind of mindset I'm trying to get into people, because like we see it now, like we have clients who save all their lives, they've invested, they've saved, and when they come to retirement, they're actually scared to spend money. And we use a bit of software, which we call in the industry a cash flow forecaster. So it's a little bit like your crystal ball in the future. And it has that ability to kind of say to clients, look, if you keep spending by X amount, you're still going to have loads of money. If you spend a bit more, you're still going to have loads of money. Or like, if you spend too much, you're going to run out of money in your 80s.
Yeah.
So we can kind of rein them in, or give them a bit of kind of more rope to kind of spend money. And it's a big transition phase for people who are just not used to spending money. But that's one thing we try and do. For us, sometimes is coaching clients to actually spend more in retirement as well.
Yeah.
But then you do have the ones where you've got to try and rein them in as well, or at least warn them, look, if you continue in this vein, you're going to run out of money.
And I think it's a really hard thing to balance, because I think for me, as someone who's not nowhere near retirement now, it's that theory of like, oh, I need to chuck as much money away for the future as I can. That. And then, then it becomes this whole argument, as you say, of, but if I end up a multi-millionaire by the time I'm 80 and I've got all this money to spend, it's pointless because I've only got 10 years left. And
I think that's it. Yeah, it's kind of, it's getting that balance, and that can be the hardest thing, and that's why I say you don't see a lot of people who sit in the middle, where they're kind of really good at kind of doing a bit of both, where they save a bit, spend a bit. I'd probably say I've probably moved a bit more towards that over probably the last decade or so, of kind of trying to spend a bit as well. You know what I mean? As well as kind of like, that bit of kind of living, like it's one thing we try and do. We try and have quite a few nice holidays a year with the kids, make experience with the kids and stuff like that. Because, retirement's a long way off, and we've got provisions in place, but we still need to have fun along the way, because before you know it, like, time just flies by.
Yeah. What advice would you give to someone like myself, who's I'm 26, and it's that catch-22 of, you want to save, but like I say, you don't want to miss out on being 26 and doing the things 26-year-olds do. Is there any advice you'd give to someone my age, going, this is what, having gone through it myself, this is what I would do?
Do you know what? And this can work for anyone, right? But I'd say for you, like, the starting point for me is, you need to know your numbers, right? If you know what's coming in and what's going out, and what actually, when it's going out, what it's being spent on, okay? If you're on track with that, and you kind of understand, okay, I know I overspend on stuff, and these are the things I overspend. If you can rein that in, you can then have that ability to not only do the nice things you want to do, but also save for the future. And for me, I think for anybody, it all starts with the budget. And this is what I'm a big fan of. If we do not, it's the same in anything, same in business, right? A business will fail if you don't know your numbers. If you don't know whether you're profitable as a business, okay? And I've seen this, and I've had these awkward conversations with clients who run businesses saying, look, I've had clients who turn over like 30 grand a year in a business, right? And they're working 60-hour weeks. They're not seeing their family. They've never taken a holiday. They're really stressed. They're really overweight. They don't look well. They could go and get a job earning the same money with benefits. It meant that they could work 9 to 5. They could see their family. They could have time off holidays, okay? I think, so for me, it comes back to, if you know your numbers, you know whether you're kind of heading in the right direction. It's the same with anything in life. You know your numbers, you know where you can kind of spend money to have fun, and where you can kind of invest money for the future or save for the future. It's getting that balance. I think if we go through life not knowing our numbers, then it's only going to go one way, and we're not going to know whether we can have fun and spend money.
Yeah.
But I think we do have to have fun along the way. And
I think that plays into one of the things I mentioned earlier, is that financial anxiety comes from not knowing where your money's going and how much you've got coming in versus how much you've got going out. Because I think
100%.
if you feel like you can't learn that, then you're like, it's almost like you're stabbing in the dark. You're just guessing it.
I think that's it for me. It's kind of like, if you don't know where you're leaking money, because I have this all the time. I'll post stuff on my social media, which will be like some of my content can be a little bit polarizing, and the reason I kind of do it is to try and get people talking about money, and I will, like the budgeting things I will bring up like that. I'll do things around people overspending and that, and it'll start people talking this saying, well, I haven't got any money left to spend. Now, don't get me wrong, times are tough at the moment in the world, okay, and in the UK, cost of living and everything. But I'm only comfortable if people say that they cannot find any spare money if they run a budget. If they run a budget and they know full well that they do not have a spare penny, that's fine. But if you're saying you haven't got any money left, but you don't run a budget, but every weekend you're having a takeaway, or you're going out for a coffee, you're going out for beers, you're going to the pub every weekend, if you actually looked at your numbers and said, well, actually, what if I didn't go to the pub one weekend or didn't do X, Y, and Z, then you would have money. Like if all your money is going on gas, electric, water, feeding you, that I know that's and there are people like that. I get that 100%. But I think there's a lot of people out there who just don't even know their numbers. Yeah. So and it's one thing I try and it does get like a lot of engagement on some of my content around that. But I'm a really strong believer in, unless you know your numbers, you can't really say you can't do anything.
Yeah, I completely agree. And do you think that's where this thing of financial overwhelm comes from? The thing of like, there's so much information out there that is just overwhelming, and that I don't feel like I've got a handle on it. Do you think that's where that comes from? It's that inability to just sit down and work out what your starting point is.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think again, it's education. I think people don't know. I've got a community page which I launched kind of this month towards the end of last month, and that's growing. In there I've got a lot of free things like free budget planners, loads of free things in there which people can download, and that's probably one of the most downloaded things I've had is the budget planner, because I talk about it all the time. I'm going to do a video that goes alongside it to show people how to use it and what to do. It's a very basic one, but I'm a firm believer in that, like unless we know where we're kind of what money we've got coming in and going out, we're just running blind into life.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think it's that whole thing of that knowledge. It's that whole saying, knowledge is power. Like, if you know what you're doing, you can almost feel more settled in your situation because you know how everything is working. Whereas if you're kind of guessing at it, you're never going to feel settled, because one month is very different to the next month.
Yeah. No, it is, and it's and that, because like I was reading some statistics recently, and don't quote me on these, but I think it was something along the lines of somewhere between, like, I want to say between 85 and 93% of employees turn up to work every day with a financial worry on their mind.
That's a crazy stat.
That's huge. It is something high like that, and that doesn't surprise me, because we all go people's mortgage rates are going up. They've got a loan. They haven't got enough money at the end of the month. Do you know what I mean? And like you look at some of the statistics, is that I want to say it's like 67% of people, if their wage didn't hit their bank at the end of the month, that would be it. They wouldn't be able to pay any bills because they got nothing else left over. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think. And this all comes down to education. We all sadly are starting to live above our means, and that's just because we're pushed by the mobile phone we have in our hand is just a sales device. Yeah, it's constantly. I don't have notifications on my phone. The only notifications I have are phone calls. So if someone wants to ring me, and that's actually only restricted to certain people as well, but I don't have notifications on my phone, because I don't want it to distract me, because it's like you'll have the news coming up, you'll have Twitter, TikTok, whatever, Instagram, sending you messages all the time, and everything's trying to market you all the time. And I think at the moment we're just being thrown all these kind of things, signals out there, which is making us want to buy. Yeah, do you know what I mean? Trying to help flood us with dopamine.
I was going to ask you about that, because there's two people that you could almost argue that we work in the social media space. We both create content. how obviously you've just said that, like I say, a lot of the things that go on with our smartphone is selling, and it's that temptation of spending money. How do you feel about that as someone that works in sort of the financial space? Obviously, you've highlighted there that you don't have the notifications on, but how does someone balance the whole thing? Because I'm guilty. I am the biggest like impulse buyer possible, but then I'm lucky that I have this little voice in my head that will go, you put this money aside for this reason, so it's okay to spend that money. Other than that, I would be a nervous wreck. So how do you balance that for you? And what advice would you give to people that are struggling with that whole thing of constantly being on their phones and that temptation to spend money?
Yeah, do you know what? I think that's probably one of the most difficult things to solve at the moment, because our consumption online is getting more and more. I'm sure we consume in excess of 2 hours a day of social media on our phones, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm very different. I've never really been a social media consumer per se, and it's really weird. People always find this really weird. Like, I see myself as a creator rather than a consumer. I consume content in order to get ideas for what I want to do and see what the market needs. But if you look at the 99% of people on social media are consumers, only 1% are actually creators out there. Okay. So there's a huge kind of market for that. So it is geared up purely to try and sell stuff to everyone. And that's the way it's kind of geared up. Like for me, I don't have notifications on my phone. I think that's a big start for people. Turn your notifications off. And there are apps you can download which will restrict your use of social media and stuff like that, because you look around, right? And I do this whenever I go places, and I'm guilty of it sometimes. I'll be scrolling through social media, but I'm also doing it to try and get ideas for what I want to do, or just check my content. But you sit on a bus, you sit on a train. Not many people go on buses these days, but you sit on a train, you walk around anywhere. Everyone is like that, constantly scrolling. That's what everyone's doing. We very rarely look around, see what else is going on in our world. It's a really difficult time. I genuinely feel my kids are 10 and 5, and I generally fear for them. Like, if this is where we are now, being totally consumed by social media, where are we going to go? And the only thing I can really say is, I think there's a couple of things. One, you've got to want to not consume it a little bit as well. You kind of got to want to detox from it. And I think it is good sometimes to just go, in the evenings for a couple of hours, let's just put my phone in the kitchen and just not use it. Nothing's going to happen. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. If it's anything emergency-wise, someone's going to ring you, your phone's going to ring. Right. Okay. Yeah. You don't have to check WhatsApp all the time. You don't have to check social media. You can just leave your phone in the kitchen, in your home office. Just put it away for a couple of hours, or even like half an hour. Yeah. That detox from social media is huge. Do you know what I mean? It's like when you see Instagram and all that, the platforms go down now and again. It's absolute carnage. Everyone's posted on Twitter. Is everyone else's Instagram down? And you're like, I don't even have Twitter, or whatever it's called now, X. Okay. And I really only do use it. I just started using TikTok a little bit, but I generally only really use Instagram, and I use it purely to post on. Yeah. But when it kind of goes down, there's just carnage. Everyone's like panicking. Yeah. Like, what are you actually going to miss out on? You're missing what the Kardashians are going to post. That might be a bit old school. Shows my age now. But what are you going to miss out on?
Yeah, it's very true. And I'd say this as someone whose instinct is, what am I doing? I'll pick up my phone. That's my instinct. And that I'm guilty of it. My instinct is I'll pick up my phone. And it's one of the worst habits I have, because one of the things I was going to say, you mentioned there about the apps to stop you using your phone, or stop using social media apps. The problem is with those is there's always a way of turning them off.
And that's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah. Whereas obviously if you've got something like you say, if you've physically put it in a different location, like this is how bad mine is. I've debated getting, one of those phone lock boxes.
Oh yeah. Well, it's got a timer on it.
Yeah, I've debated getting one of those, because I'm like, my phone consumption is ridiculous, because it's like this whole, it's that dopamine thing of you get sucked in, but then I do think that has a big impact on, I say, the financial decisions we all make, because you're constantly selling, constantly doing, and then I think as well, the other issue that comes with it, just to add on to before you answer, is there's two sides of it. There's the side of the consumer, and then there's the side of it that to basically do well in today's generation, you've got to have 4 or 5 side hustles.
Yeah.
And that's the other issue.
Yeah, no, that's a whole other conversation. Side hustle stuff, Jim. We'll touch on that in a second. But I think, yeah, like we're being pushed ads on every platform we're on. You know, you're on Facebook, you're on Instagram, you're on Twitter. You're being pushed ads around shopping because you'll be retargeted. If you've been on a website, it's going to retarget you through social media. You know, it's a very simple process. It lasts for about 30 days. The cookies will get you, and but then that comes down to like to kind of digress slightly on this is what I generally will do is if I do see something, and I get caught by these ads all the time, yeah, I'll go in there, I'll have a look. But what I will do is I will put it in the checkout. Amazon usually do this with Amazon all the time. I'll put it in the checkout, okay, and I'll come back to it in 24, 48 hours. If it's, I've got loads of stuff in my Amazon, my checkout of my Amazon. I deleted a load yesterday. Because there's stuff that I thought I want, and I left it in there, and I'll leave it the following day, and I've forgotten about it.
Yeah,
you know, it's a great skill if you can do it. Not everyone can do it. Most people are kind of very much like click, click, click. I'm done. It's so easy now to click and pay, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Agreed. Yeah,
like it's probably far too easy now. But that's my general trick is, and unless it's something I know I really need because like kids need new shoes, gotta buy them. No choice for that.
Yeah.
But if it's an item of clothing or something, well, I got loads of clothes. I don't need any more. So, I mean, so, and that's just a discipline, really. Do you know what I mean? And that,
yeah.
And again, that comes back to, for me, a little bit of you've got to want to do it as well.
Completely agree. I think it's that whole thing, like you say, it's having that discipline. Like the strategy you just said there about the Amazon basket, it's having the discipline to go, do you know what? Going to leave that for 48 hours, come back. But even as someone, I am very much an impulse person of, as that, it's for me, I think it's more that whole thing of, I always say my brain's like one of those ones that's got 100 tabs open. So if I can go click, click, done, I know it's done. It's done. It's dusted. It's over there. I haven't got to worry about it. So
yeah, no, I know that feeling, and it's interesting to talk about side hustles as well. Do you mean there's that huge? I think that's got. Maybe I'm just not being fed that stuff by an algorithm, but I see it a lot less now than I used to. The whole side hustle culture, but it got a bit out of control. The whole side hustle thing but I think the problem with side hustles are you can become a busy fool, and actually, if you focus more time on. And I've been guilty of this, where I've had multiple businesses running at one time, and actually none of them are really making that much money because I was like playing around and I wasn't giving my full focus to it. But I think that's the same with work. I think potentially if you've either doubled down on the job you're doing and thought, well, actually, can I get a promotion or can I go and find another job? All this time trying to find a side hustle, couldn't I go and find another job which pays me more money? Yeah, because unless you get lucky with most of these side hustles, a lot of them are just kind of like they're just time sappers. Do you mean you just become a busy fool?
I think there's this whole thing, as I say, it's that the culture that social media creates that keeping up with the Joneses culture of you need to be earning X amount of money to be successful.
10 grand a month, isn't it? That's the key figure, which amazes me because isn't this something like the statistic is like 1% of the population earn over 100,000? So there's a lot of these people earning 10 grand a month. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which I think is more than 1% of the population. So I'm kind of like...
It's so true. But then I think as well, it's that whole thing of it's been inflated quite a lot. Like that whole idea of 10 grand a month. 10 grand a month is a lot of money. Yeah, I guarantee if I said to you, go spend this on sensible stuff, you'd struggle.
Oh yeah. Like if you could comfortably earn 10 grand a month, run a business side hustle, like you don't need any more than that.
No.
You can put a bit away for savings. You can have a nice house. You can live a very nice life, have nice holidays. You can do all right.
I think the biggest thing you've just highlighted there is that's also a big shift of mentality for people with finances. It's like my automatic thought process is if I'm earning 10 grand a month, do you know what the really stupid thing I get excited about is? Oh my God, I'd be able to put away so much.
Yeah.
That is what goes through my head. But then that, I think, as we've touched on there, it's almost this whole idea of, oh, but I need to be fully, because there's a lot of pressure on young people at the moment to put so much money in their pension. And while it's a very valid reason, I think almost there's an element of it's been over-egged a bit. I'm with it. Like, I agree. A lot of my generation aren't doing it. Yeah. But then the ones that are doing it, it's like, cool, you guys are going crazy with it. Like, relax a little bit.
And I think that's it again. I think there just doesn't seem to be happy mediums and everything. I think everyone's either not doing enough or they're doing too much in a way. Do you know what I mean? And they're kind of going a little bit too crazy with it. I don't think there's enough people in that middle ground.
Yeah, completely. And I think it's that whole thing of like too much of anything's a bad thing. Like too much of social media is a bad thing. Too much exercise is a bad thing. It's that, I'd say, it's that finding that medium. But then I agree. It's that whole thing of, I think people panic and they go, "Oh, I'm not doing this thing, so I'm going to do everything and try and sort of fast track it because our society tells you that you want everything yesterday."
And that's the thing, I think, and that's the danger of social media, isn't it? That society is telling us that we need to do it a certain way, and we're really bad for trying to follow what other people do. I've never really been like that, I guess, in a way. I've never been one to kind of follow a crowd. I've always been one to kind of anti-establishment, I guess. Do you know what I mean? I kind of I push back a lot on things, which, don't get me wrong, it has its good sides and its bad sides. But, I've never really followed the norm. But I think that's just in my blood.
Yeah. I think it's interesting you say that because those are the ones that can kind of create the different way of thinking for everyone else.
Yeah.
Because we just go, oh, but this is what everyone else does. It's that keeping up with the Joneses mentality, and it's so can be so draining, but then also have such a big impact on how we live our lives. But what advice would you give people? Like, we've talked a lot about finding happy mediums and finding places where we can sort of make things better. But what common habits would you say to people to change to better improve their financial knowledge, but also their financial position?
Yeah, it comes back to education for me, but there's two sides to this. Okay, we need more financial education, but where do we get it from?
Yeah,
because there's so much noise out there online, and don't get me wrong, there's some good people online trying to do some good things, but then there's also some people online who are not really doing good things, and it's a very confusing message out there. I think the hardest thing is, there's nowhere really to go to get good education around money. Now, I'm trying to change that a little bit, but I'm just one person, really. Do you know what I mean? Against a big population. So I think for me, it's like you've got to find good education somewhere, and if you're going to find education from someone around money, you need to just make sure that they're kind of the real and the legitimate. Do you know what I mean? They're not. There's no kind of, what you don't want them to is there be a means to an end where they're actually trying to sell you an investment to put money into. You can learn how to do that yourself, okay, if you get the right knowledge. And then from the education point, then it's kind of learning how to manage money properly, learn how to budget your money. Okay. Yeah. If you can get your budgeting right, the rest will come easy. If you know what's coming in and going out, the rest is just easy. I can guarantee you that. Okay. Yeah. Then what you do after that, saving, investing, buying a house, investing, setting a business up, they're all ancillary things. They're all just the bonuses around. If you can just get your knowledge right, so you understand the basics of money, okay, the basics of potentially running a business, okay, the basics of earning income and pay, then if you can understand good debt, bad debt, how to budget your money, and then all those things come together, the rest then is easy. You know, the investing part, it's not rocket science. Yeah. Buying a house is not rocket science. But I think if you can get those foundations right, they'll just set you up for life. But but that's twofold. It comes down to like, where do you find this good education?
Yep, completely agree. I mean, as I say, it's that whole thing of someone who teaches you real life finances, as opposed to, as we say, the biggest problem with social media is people are trying to sell you, oh, it's easy to earn 10 grand a month. Yeah, that's not actual good advice.
It's not. And the thing is, like, the problem you get is, right, these people, the majority of these people telling you they earn 10 grand a month, they don't earn 10 grand a month from running a business. They run 10 grand a month from selling you a course to tell you how to make 10 grand a month.
Yeah.
Which just blows my mind, that does. Do you know what I mean? The people will sell you a course on how to do something which they've actually never really done themselves. And they've got to 10 grand. They technically have got there, but they got there by selling you the product. Do you know what I mean? And
it's a really weird, like, it almost to me feels like a pyramid scheme, because what they do is they get you in, and basically you become one of them to do the same thing again,
Yeah.
it's really interesting. And I think that's the other, like you say, it's that finding those people that actually teach you real finances. And that's why, obviously, Gareth, you do everything you do, but it's very much around normal people finances, not I'm a multimillionaire and this is how I manage my money.
And that's the bit that I'm trying to kind of help with, is that because not everyone can access the financial planning services that I offer one-to-one for clients, because it does come at a price. Do you know what I mean? There is an entry level to it, and that's just because there's not enough of us in the UK. We're very heavily regulated in what we do, that we can't, we can't help someone who just wants to put £50 a month away. But then there isn't anyone else who really can help with that.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So I'm trying to bridge that gap with some education stuff to kind of say, well, actually, you can get the knowledge to go and do that, and this is where you can go and get the knowledge. I mean, and I'm in the middle of building out a kind of like a hybrid version of a course, effectively, where I'll do real live lessons, but it's going to teach people the money skills the schools never taught them.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of free stuff around that in my community anyway, which is building at the moment. But there's going to be some low cost paid ones, because I need to run the kind of business, so there's got to be a cost to it, and allow me to develop it and grow it and give the best education I can, bring in the experts I want to bring in to help people. But it's going to be at that level of actually taking you back to grassroots and saying, well, this is how we start. This is how we start. This is how we put a foundation in place. And then if you want to get into the more technical investing and stuff, this is where to go and find that advice. Okay.
Completely. It's that whole thing. I'm trying not to run before you can walk, because I think too many people get caught up in the investing bubble, because that's what they see everyone else doing, rather than actually learning the basics is far more powerful.
Yeah, no, exactly. It is that. And I think sometimes we overcomplicate things. Do you know what I mean? And like, I've spoken in a few schools recently, and I was speaking to one of the teachers there, saying, we could do this as a lesson. We would love to have this type of stuff as a lesson, and which would be great. But I don't think many schools are interested. They haven't really got the budget for it, and but I think you could teach money skills at a very basic level and business skills at a very basic level, which could set people up for life and probably solve a lot of the problems we have around kind of debt and money worries in the world, because we're instilling at an early age.
Oh, completely. Like, my argument is, as you mentioned earlier, is always, why are we, there's so many topics we aren't learning in school that no one uses. Like, I will bang the drum of algebra. It has its powers and it can be used. But I would argue that finance is far more important, because it would reduce people's anxieties. This is a pure plucking something out of the air. I would be intrigued to see the impact over 10 years on the amount of people struggling with stress and anxiety if we implemented that in schools.
Yeah,
to see what the impact would be.
100%. I generally kind of do think that a lot of our stress and anxiety in the world come from money, because everyone's going on about like the cost of living crisis. It's thrown in our face every day. Do you know what I mean? So even if you haven't got an issue with it, you're going to be thinking about it. Yeah.
Completely. But it's like anything. The age-old question of any kid that leaves school or who wants to build a career is, what would you do if money was no object? What would you go and create the job for?
Yeah.
But that's not a realistic question, because unfortunately it's this argument of I reluctantly believe in money does make the world go round, unfortunately. Because it does. And I think that's the other thing as well, is giving that knowledge to someone at such a young age will also mean that they can not better plan their futures, because no one can plan their future, but feel more empowered to sort of know what they're doing.
Yeah. And that's it. And I think and having that ability to deal with things that are thrown at them.
Definitely. I wanted to touch on something actually, because it's also an area I don't know too much about. Is you mentioned, obviously we spoke about how people are struggling managing their debt, and you mentioned good debt versus bad debt. Can you expand a bit on what those two scenarios are?
Yeah, so for me, good debt is where you own an asset which will generally either appreciate in value or pretty much stay the same. Yeah. Okay. So that's generally if you're buying a house to live in. Yeah. Bricks and mortar, maybe a classic car or a painting or something like that. Like, bad debt for me is where So this can be taken in 2 points, okay? People will say credit cards are bad debt, but credit cards can be used to your advantage. And, and I've got a lot of clients and friends who will use them purely to pay everything off, and they pay it off at the end of the month, okay? Which is a great thing because you get points. One of my clients, like, he flies all around the world business class because he uses his points, okay, to do that. Yep. And he's really savvy in the way he does that. But he never, ever gains interest on anything because he never keeps the money on there long enough. That's fine. It's the habit of buying stuff on credit card to fuel your lifestyle where you're not going to be paying it off, and all it's doing is accruing 27% interest. Do you know what I mean? And going that. So yes, I know, like, there's arguments to say, should you really get a car on finance or shouldn't you? I think if you need your car for your job and you need to drive a lot of distance, then you need a really nice car, potentially. Okay. And I'm not saying people shouldn't have nice cars, but if you're not going that far, you don't have to drive that far to work and so on and so forth. You maybe you're only in a couple of days a week. You don't need an £800 a month car on the drive. If your job is driving all the time, you need a tidy car because you're going to be in a long time. It needs to be comfortable. It needs to be robust. I get that. But I don't think, and this is just personal opinion more than anything. So I think, so that's what I kind of say. So cars can be good debt and bad debt. Property, as long as you it's going to appreciate in value, it's an investment, that's fine. But like taking loans out to go on holiday to, like, the thing that gets me now is you can get a Deliveroo takeaway with Klarna. So you can pay for your Deliveroo takeaway, or I think it's Deliveroo Uber Eats, over 3 months.
Yeah.
But people don't realize the impact of that. So mortgage lenders now are hugely looking at things like Klarna, these buy now, pay later. And we had a client come to us about a year ago to get a mortgage. And between husband and wife, they had 30 Klarnas in 2 months.
Jeez.
But there was some was like £5. And I'm always wondering, I was like, well, we bought takeaway, we added on that. And we were like, well, we could afford to do it, but we just thought we paid over 3 months. They couldn't get a mortgage.
Yeah, because the
lender looked at it from a point of view to say, well, these guys can't handle their money. They've taken 30 Klarnas out in 2 months.
Yep.
I mean,
it's crazy
whether they can afford it or not.
People don't think about that either. Again, the only reason I'm aware of that is because of what my mum does. Yeah. That's the only reason and also I just don't. It's that whole thing of why would you pay? I don't. And people.
I know it blows. It absolutely blows my mind. Like you order a hungover McDonald's takeaway on a Sunday morning, right? Because you had a few beers, and you pay that £12 over 3 months.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah,
and that's the reality of it. Do you know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, but it's too easy. This is the thing. It's too
easy.
You can literally
how is it allowed? It shouldn't even be allowed. Like our regulator in the UK should not allow that.
I literally don't know how it is because, as I say, it's too easy. In terms of any website you go on now, particularly if you go on your phone, you can very quickly click Google Pay, Apple Pay, Klarna.
Yeah.
Or the old traditional way of typing in your card number. But it is just a click of a button.
I know.
And I mean, for me, I just don't see the point in it because I'm like, I'm very similar to yourself of like, well, it's £12. If I can't afford £12 tomorrow or today, I'm not saying I'm going to be able to do it tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's just ridiculous. Like, it blows my mind, stuff like that. And I think that's the spiral and trap we've got into, and I don't see that sadly changing unless there comes in some sort of regulation that stops some of these things. But it's being advertised, this whole thing of being able to pay. Because I think now Uber Eats, there's 2 different versions of Klarna.
Yeah, there is.
You can use on it. I saw it the other day and I was like, are we really advertising that?
There's 2. I can't remember
the other one's called.
Yeah, there's Klarna, there's ClearPay. There's quite a few of them, to be fair. And I think... No. The other thing I was going to ask your opinion on is obviously you mentioned there about good debt being buying property. That's quite a hot topic at the moment because some people will argue that it's not. Because oftentimes, like when I talk about it, it's like a house really where if you're living in it and it's going to be your home, it's a heart decision, not necessarily a head decision.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Of like you've got to like it, you're gonna be living there, and then the argument is that you're not actually going to make as much money as necessarily you might have originally thought. And I just wonder what your perception, your thought around that is, because it's something that's talked about a lot. And I'm still very split. I'm like I kind of get what they're talking about, but then also I'm like homes it's a long-term thing, and it's also, I wouldn't view a home as an investment in terms of.
No, I agree.
It's
No, I agree with that. I correct people on this a lot. It's good debt from the point of view of somewhere you're going to live, but I think what you can't class your home as is an investment, because how are you ever going to realize that investment? The only way you're ever going to realize it is by selling it, and downsizing. And these are conversations we have with clients when they come to retirement. Actually, the statistics show that most people don't downsize in retirement. They may consider it, but they very rarely do, because there's a couple of things you've got to take into account. One, they've lived there all their life, okay, and they've got all their worldly belongings there. Their kids live there. Their grandkids come there, and so on and so forth, okay. What are they actually going to downsize to? Are they going to downsize to like a one-bed studio apartment or something like that? What realistically, what are you going to downsize to? Are you going to move out of the area you're in your like 70s? Yeah. What are you actually going to downsize to? So, and you can't just sell a doorknob or a door to pay the bills. So from a point of view, don't think there are products now around where you can kind of take mortgages out in retirement and
isn't it equity
release and and they call it retirement interest only mortgages. A few different ones out there, but again, that's a mortgage. That's a debt secured on there, and if you don't keep up the payments, they can take it off you. Yeah, okay. So, no, it's not really an investment. If you buy properties to invest in, to rent them out, that is an investment, okay? And I kind of get that, and there's good and bad sides to that. It's not as easy as it used to be, and I think unless you're going to aggressively build a property portfolio, it's not something to get into if you just want one or two properties these days. All the property gurus will tell you otherwise, but I've seen it from real life side of it. The clients of mine who don't have big portfolios are just offloading it because they're a pain in the arse. The tax is difficult on them. They're not making much profit on them anymore because of interest rates and tax and so on and so forth. So they're not as good as they used to be. If that's your job and you've got a lot of property, it can be good.
I think it's as you say, it's that whole thing of it's been dramatized of everyone should have two properties, but actually the realistic side of it isn't necessarily that. And because even me, I sit there and go, but you've also got to have the capital to put in, because you've got to put more down on a property you're going to rent out as opposed to a property you're going to buy to live in. So
and the cost of buying it, the additional stamp duty, the fees involved in it, and actually what is the real return on it? I think, if it's your job and you're going to maybe potentially buy things low value, do them up, flip them, and make a profit, that's fine. But I think your stereotypical 3-bed terraced house renting out is just not as profitable as it used to be anymore.
And just before we finish, one of the things that, again, has come up on talking of property is this debate of renting versus buying. And I think the interesting thing for me when I look at it is that it's very much a case-by-case basis of sometimes renting suits people. If they're doing 6-month contracts at a time and that's their job and they have to move location, then yes, renting makes sense. And then the argument is, but you're not building equity in something. So I wonder, from your perspective, working in finance, what's your thought process around the renting versus buying argument? Yeah,
I wouldn't say I favour either, really. I think, again, it comes down to personal circumstances, but I think people shouldn't be afraid to just rent. We have this, I guess, real need in the UK to want to buy a property all the time, and we get really hung up on it. And I don't think we should. Do you know what I mean? And there is no problem with renting. There's enough properties out there you can rent in reality out there if you want to kind of do it. And you can, okay, don't get me wrong, a landlord may want to sell the house, you might have to move somewhere else. But generally you'll find somewhere to move. I think we shouldn't feel pressure into having to buy somewhere, because there's so many people say the average age of first-time buyers is 34 years old in the UK, and it's growing, and I kind of get that because of the cost of it. But we're massively obsessed by buying property in the UK to live in. I think it's like places like Germany where most people rent. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like houses.
Australia is the same. My cousin lives in Australia. Buying's not really their thing. They all rent.
And it's we just get a little bit hung up on it in the UK, and I wouldn't let that stress you out. You know what I mean? I think it can, it can be a good, I've always bought, I say I've always bought. It's quite interesting, actually. I've owned property, but I've also then rented while I've been in them, because I've rented my properties out, and then I've gone and rented places just to live different places around Cardiff and South Wales with friends.
That's a cool
So
idea.
I went through a period of probably 12 years when I was younger of actually renting, even though I had my own properties. I had 2 properties and I used to rent them out just because like I wanted just to experience different things and living with friends and kind of groups. And like, I lived in Roath in Cardiff, and which was nice. I lived in Cardiff Bay for a long time with one of my good friends. I've kind of moved around a bit and it's actually been quite nice. And I'd probably say people to try it. Do you know what I mean? It's like rent for a bit. Don't worry overly about buying a house. Because, you can do that settling down later on in life. And we are finding more people buying stuff later in life now as well.
I think the problem you got there of the rebuttal I imagine people will come back with is the one that actually, to be fair, I get quite a lot from my parents, which is if I'm renting a property and then I suddenly now want to buy a property, that journey is a lot harder because I don't have the deposit capital and everything else that goes with it. So I think there's a catch-22 of the renting then buying argument. I do, there is some value in it and I do see the reason behind it, but then as you say, it's that like cost versus experience idea as well.
Yeah.
Speaking of experience, before we go to the last question, I wanted to ask, as you mentioned earlier that you have 2 young children, what's some advice that you wish you could you're going to be giving them as they go through and grow up? What's some advice that you could give to the listeners as to what sort of advice you'd like to see young people being delivered?
Yeah, are we talking money or just generally, like kind of?
I'd say both, because I think as well for it all links together and it can bring someone's journey.
I think the big one for me is so not a money thing, is for me is try everything. Okay, don't be afraid to try things and fail. Don't be afraid to try lots of different jobs and find where you want to be. Like, I have no issue with that. I know, like when I get CVs for people with jobs, if they've had 10 or 12 different jobs over a short period, I look at it, but I look at it to say, well, okay, was it 12 jobs in exactly the same arena? Because if it was, then maybe we've got a problem. Okay. So if they were in a solicitor's practice, not that I'd be employing a solicitor, and they've been through, over the last sort of 10 years, they've been through 12 different law practices. That's a problem. Okay. For me, if they've worked in McDonald's, then they've worked in IT, then they've worked in a foundry, then they've worked in a cafe, then they've worked in a restaurant, then they've worked in a leisure centre. For me, that's someone trying to find their way, and I have no problem with that at all. And I'm also like, I go with my gut feeling when I kind of interview people for jobs, and how they come across and whether they fit what I want to do and fit the culture of my business. So I think for me, for anyone growing up, is just try things. Don't be afraid to try things. You're not a tree, you can move, right? So if you try other countries, like for my kids, it's very much going to be like, fly the nest, go and try Australia if you want to, go and try America. You don't have to stay where you are, because we're terrible in this country for moaning about the weather. And I always say to people, you're not a tree, move. Do you know what I mean? Like some people can't, I get it, right? Because there's certain constraints, like there's reasons why I can't do that with my family, and that's why we stay in the UK. But I hate the fact it's cold all winter. I like warmer weather, but not that I say I'd move away, but some people can't for certain reasons. Mm-hmm. So, but I think that's the big thing for me. For any children or any young people listening to this, just try things and do not be afraid to try and fail. Okay. Failure is feedback. It's not failing. It's just feedback. You've just done something slightly wrong. You just got to change what you're doing. It's the same as running a business. Don't be afraid to try something. If you want to set a business, try it. What's the worst that's going to happen? And especially try and set your business up before you settle down with a family, kids and all that, where you've got a lot of pressures. Whilst you're living at home, go for it. Because what's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to have to go and get a job. Yeah. Okay. And then the money thing just comes back to the same thing. For me, it's education, budget, making a plan, educating yourself. Just educate yourself about money. If you can get that right from the start, learn how to budget, the rest will just come easily. But that'll probably be my life lessons really for people.
And then what about, just on that topic, is there, obviously there's yourself, but is there any resources that you can direct people to if they want to develop their financial education?
There's some really good podcasts out. Some really good YouTube channels out there. One is by a friend of mine, Pete Matthew. He's a financial advisor. He does a really good podcast called Meaningful Money. It's a YouTube channel, really good for talking about money and things like that. I've got my own community, free community on the Skool platform, SKOOL. It's called the Wealth Academy, and it's all about teaching people the skills the schools never taught them about money. I think there are lots of resources, some good books out there. Morgan Housel's books out there around money. There's some good kind of stuff there. But I think whatever you kind of pick up, make sure that the people you're kind of looking at have actually got a background in what they say. Yeah, because for me, it's knowledge is power, and the right knowledge is the right power. Because there's so many people out there who are, in my eyes, charlatans in what they do. You just got to be so careful.
Also, it's that whole thing of time is valuable, and it's also you don't want to waste your time on the wrong information. I mean, as you say, it's that whole, you got to make mistakes, but then also if you can caveat that to try and reduce it, then great.
Yeah.
And then lastly, I want to ask you the question I ask every guest at the end of every episode, which is, what's one piece of politically correctness that you really strongly agree with or disagree with?
Do you know what, whether this is political correctness or not, but discipline in schools. I think this is a big one for me. There's been a lot of stuff in the press recently about is it the head teacher? Is he from one of the schools in Wales where he's very much old school? And I love what he's talking about. And this probably comes from experience, okay? I could never be a teacher, but I do a lot of talks in schools. So I went to a school recently to do a talk, and I could not believe how badly behaved the children were and how disrespectful they were to the teachers. And I was in there talking about entrepreneurship and business because that's what I was kind of doing. So I do free sessions around that in schools, and there were some great kids in there listened. But there was, in every class, there was a couple of class clowns, as I kind of call it, and the usual thing. I do the thing like, if I put £1,000 on the table today, what would you spend the money on? And one guy was like, "Oh yeah, I just buy drugs and sell it." And I was like, "Oh, there you are." I said, and my response to him was, "Great. So I know where you're going to be in life. You're going to be spending most of your time in prison." And everyone was just like, the teachers were like, "I can't believe you just said that." I was like, "Yeah, we picked the class clown out," and everyone started laughing at him. Now, one of the teachers afterwards said to me, "I wish I could have said something like that." I was like, "But why can't you?" I couldn't teach because I would have thrown him out of the class. Gone, get out. Do you know what I mean?
It's an interesting thing because it's that whole debate that we're seeing a lot of, like soft parenting versus hard parenting. And it's interesting because I grew up in a case of, I wouldn't say mine were hard parenting. I just knew where the line was.
100%, same here.
I just knew what the line was. Like, my mum just had to give me a look. Yeah. And I was like, "Oh, okay, I've overstepped the boundary here. I need to step back a little bit." And that was that. Whereas that doesn't seem to, even the generation before me, that doesn't seem to be there anymore.
No,
kids just do what they want.
My wife's sister is a teacher as well, and she says about I just couldn't teach. You see the kind of disrespect for teachers. We see that, like, I used to be in the police, and don't get me wrong, people were disrespectful to me when I was in the police, but that's even worse now. I speak to people I used to work with. That's getting worse. We've become this very lawless society in the UK. And I just think we're just not hard enough. We just got too soft. And I'm not talking about bringing back the cane from the old days, do you know what I mean? But I think we need to be harder with people, do you know what I mean? And we need to be harder with the parents as well, because people are saying, "Oh, it's not the parents' fault." It's coming from somewhere.
But the interesting thing I would caveat that with is and this is just, I'm not a parent, I'm just making an assumption, is the pressures that adults are under now. I think, obviously, we've spoken a lot about financial pressures. Yeah. I think that has a huge impact because
100%. I agree.
It's that whole thing of the brain space you've got to properly teach your kids and go through that disciplining process has a huge impact. So I do sympathize in some respects of, it's just the pressure is just insane.
Yeah, no, you're right, actually. Do you know what I mean? I think that's a big thing, we spend a lot of time with our kids. Me and my wife, we're both self-employed, but we do turn up for our kids every day. Don't get me wrong, we're tired, and some days you don't have the energy to do the stuff you want to do. But I know there's parents out there who work long hours, and they get home from work and they just chuck the iPad at their child and sit them in a corner, and that's the kind of society we've kind of come into, and the interaction time, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's a little bit what happens with some of the kids, is they feel like they're just a bit neglected at home, so then it comes into school life. But I don't envy the teachers, but something's got to be done because this is just getting out of control. Do you mean? It's like all the nonsense with all the kind of crime in London and stuff. Do you mean? We've just become lawless because they know nothing's going to be done to them. Like if they play up in school, they're going to get told off. That's it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
it's
by expelling them's not going to be the answer.
Yeah, as I say, I don't know how we install it because, as I say, I wouldn't say my parents had hard parenting. No. It was just, I think, do you know what it is? And my mum's actually said this to me before. It's about when you punish them, having something you can follow through on. So, like, for example, if my mum said to me, I'm taking the PlayStation away, you best believe if I overstep that boundary too far, it will happen.
Yeah, and we're the same with our kids. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of... it is difficult. Do you know what I mean? I don't know what the answer is, but I think that for me, I guess we class as political correctness has gone the wrong way to a point actually where I think it's very difficult to bring it back now.
Yeah, I agree. I think as well, obviously, as with anything, there are exceptions and there are kids out there that have got similar to what you sort of old school views. But I think, as you say, I don't know how we go about it because. No. I think, as you said, we don't want to be going down the route of bringing back some of the proper old school stuff because it's not going to work. But then it's like, as my dad said the other day, how do you get a detention? But how do you discipline them? There's nothing. Obviously, there's nothing stopping them just walking out the room.
No, there's not, and that's the problem now. Like you couldn't lock them in the room like you could years ago in detention. If they want to go, they can just go. There's nothing you can do about it. Yeah. So it's interesting. So. Probably that would be my big one, I would say.
And I think just as the last one, I think the other thing as well is what we touched on earlier of that whole thing of also making sure the lessons are engaging. Because I think the difficulty you've got as my sister's an ex-teacher as well is that because of the system that's in place with schools, teachers aren't allowed to be as creative as they used to be with what lessons they create, which then means the kids aren't as engaged. What's the first thing you do when you're not engaged?
You don't listen.
Act up and do something different.
And I think that's where you've got to have that ability to pick children out of school who probably shouldn't be in lessons and maybe should be in some sort of more creative environment. Do you know what I mean? Like, okay, they're not going to really excel at maths, but maybe they can be creative in something else. And but then that's a whole new thing. I have a
big belief of if a kid shows a talent at a young age, if they're enjoying it and they're loving it, if that changes, stop it. But if they're enjoying it and loving it, push them into that.
Honestly,
because they're going to pick it. They're going to. It's going to be like a kid in a sweet shop.
Yeah. It's their superpower, so you've got to use them, haven't you? Do you know what I mean?
And I think that's going to be a big thing. But thank you so much for coming on. It's been a great conversation. And of course, so I'll link Gareth's details below. So if you do want to check him out or reach out to him, I'll link everything below for you. But thanks again for coming on.
No, you're welcome. Thanks. It's been great.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Not Quite Podcast. Please make sure you follow us on TikTok and Instagram to get regular updates about the podcast. These my dads make it hurt.